Welcome to a special conversation about spirituality and the 12 steps with Kevin Lenny, who is an LCSW. I am Loretta Depka Zerbo, and thank you for joining us. We are doing this evening because it follows Vince's series on spirituality and the 12 steps. Vince has talked about it for 4 weeks, and this last week we invited Kevin Lenny, who is a practitioner here at the Starting Point. Kevin has counseled and advocated for people with substance abuse related concerns and those who suffer from various mental health diagnoses, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorders, and others for more than 25 years. He actually started as an intern here at the Starting Point. Kevin has worked with both adolescents and adults, addresses men's and women's issues, and works within a holistic approach. He uses an empathetic, client-centered model that meets the person where they are. Kevin believes in providing a safe, non-judgmental atmosphere for people to mend, increase their strengths, and evolve to be the person they choose. Kevin, thank you so much for coming. And at this point in our tape, I'm afraid we had a little blip, but Kevin was talking about being here at the Starting Point for 25 years, starting as an intern. He actually did a 2-year stint instead of a 1-year stint. So with that, I'm going to continue with the original recording and listen to how Kevin answers some of these questions about the difference between religion and spirituality, how you define spirituality, how you can find spirituality in the steps. And it's a fascinating conversation that I hope you will enjoy.
They would only let you do 1 year. And I was adamant that I wanted to do 2 years. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I finished in 2007. Graduated in May, and then October I started my practice at Starting Point in 2007.
So with all of that said, he's been around forever. And we're really thrilled that Kevin can join us tonight. And I think you're going to really enjoy it because I really did at noon. Kevin is an LCSW. He advocates, he counsels and advocates for people with substance abuse related concerns and those who suffer from various mental health diagnoses such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and others for more than 25 years. He works with both adolescents and adults, addresses men and women's issues, and works within a holistic approach. He uses an empathetic, client-centered model that meets the person where they are. Kevin believes in providing a safe and non-judgmental atmosphere for people to mend, increase their strengths, and evolve to be the person they choose. Kevin has a very active practice here. We were just talking about it. The days he's here, he comes in and he is every hour with clients. And I only hear good things about him. I never hear a complaint about you, Kevin. Should I talk to Dawn?
If you catch her on a bad day, she'll have plenty. If you want to know how, if you want to know what I'm really like, ask my wife.
That's right. That's what they always say, right? So Kevin is here to talk to us again about the steps and spirituality. I was teasing him a little before you all joined us. That is amazing. A little different approach, but the same message that Vince carries. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. So let's jump in. Spirituality and religion are often confused, but I think we'll agree that they're both in search of the meaning of life. So I'm going to turn this to you, Kevin, and ask you, how do you define spirituality?
Well, I'll preface it with when I look at this approach, I look at it from, I myself have been in recovery for quite some time. And I also look at it from the clinical aspect. So, and my recovery, I know most recovery 12-step stuff comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous. That seems to be, patient zero for this kind of stuff. And in having this conversation with my wife, who's also a clinician, works in the field, but is not in recovery, has come across this, and she pointed out, and I've seen this also, that a lot of people have a problem. People can have a problem with the 12 steps when they start seeing God and it gets equated with religion. And that can turn them off. They can look at the first step of, yes, my life was unmanageable, and certainly my life was powerless. And then you start moving into the second and third steps, and they start referencing higher powers and God. And then can just kind of walk away and say, yeah, evidently this is some kind of religion, this is some kind of cult, and that's not for me. And it's trying to find the difference between religion and spirituality. And when I looked up the definition of religion in the Webster Dictionary, they said the service and worship of God or the supernatural, some commitment or devotion to a religious faith or observance, where in the Webster's Dictionary, spirituality, it was relating to consisting of or affecting the spirit, kind of the person and their needs, and not around a deity or anything like that. It's interesting in looking at the steps, looking at the traditions. There is a lot of references and mentions about God, or I wouldn't say spirituality pointedly, but God, and it's always referenced as God as I understand him, or her, whatever the case may be. I had talked about this before. It's interesting to think about where 12-step recovery kind of started. If you look at it and think, oh, well, it kind of started with Alcoholics Anonymous, that started in Akron, Ohio. And what was around Akron, Ohio at that time? Churches. They might have had a couple synagogues here and there. So that was the reference point. And people can become uncomfortable again with the mention of God. But, the literature tells us that the founders, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, they would reach out to clergy. They had been through sanitariums. Clergy had tried to help them at various points to try to stay sober, and it didn't work. So when they finally came upon this idea of just two people sitting together and having a conversation and helping each other, they then went back to other people that had helped them in the past. And that seemed to be some people of faith who happen to be, in the church, Catholic Church, Presbyterian, whatever the case may be. And it occurred to me how that could have been different if it was two men or two women in Saudi Arabia that decided to get sober. They might as well have gone to the mosque and not talk to the imam about how do I stop doing this thing. Or if it was in Israel, that they went to the temples and they talked to the rabbis, how do I do this thing? That reference could have been in there. But it seems to me that, and I think it's, kind of some divine intervention, where when they were writing the 12 steps and they came upon this notion that, yes, it's important to put down the drink and keep down the drink and acknowledge that this is a problem. And it can be a problem related to anything, because out of AA came Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, and various other things. That God was a help, but they needed to broaden it, and they didn't want to overly define it. So that's how they kind of came up with, as I understand him or her. So when people of other faiths come in, they can feel welcome. And when they came, put the big book together, it was having a chapter for people that didn't believe in God, or agnostic, or they atheist, and how to address that concern. But it is, in looking at the steps, it's mentioned several times in various different ways. So I always find that important. People can certainly want to look past that and not get overly involved in that. But I think eventually those that stick around, those that work the program, eventually see the benefits of having that in your life. It's an understanding of there's there's something other than myself, just me making this happen. And that some people will look at God, some people will look at Buddha, some people will look at the group as a whole as that. Some people look at the universe, some people look at nature, whatever the case may be, but it's having an understanding that it's something other than myself. And I think that's where the spirituality comes in.
So Kevin, does each step of the 12 steps take you to sequentially take you to a spiritual awakening in your mind?
Um, I don't know if individually, like if someone works each individual step after each step, they're having this like, oh my, this awakening, like a thunderbolt, like, oh my God, now I see the light. I don't know if it happens after each step. I do get a sense that when one works all of the steps during that process, they can start to have that feeling. What I describe that feeling is in part faith of, I think I'm going to be okay. They ask me to do this, I do this, and I don't drink, or I don't do drugs, or I don't gamble, and I get through it. I don't think I can get through it, but I get through it by not going back to my old behaviors and my old patterns. Um, I think as someone stays in recovery long enough, they may then be able to reflect back on each of those steps and see that there was some awakening as they walk through each of those steps. When someone certainly looks at that first step, you can look at that and think, yes, my life obviously is not going well. This is not where I wanted to end up. Obviously, I can't stop these behaviors and I just need to stop. And there's a lot of time and energy just put in, just keep it down, put it down, keep it down. That's okay. Just come back. Don't worry about anything else. Just don't pick up. That's okay. As time goes on, what I hear from most people, if not all people, is an understanding that at those moments, especially in the beginning, that the ability to not pick up again, that must have been something else. Because up to that point, everything they had done always led back to that behavior, back to that drug, back to that alcohol, back to whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, things got so bad, they walk into or find a room of people that are in recovery and that they stop doing that. Sometimes, people will talk about an experience of, I walked in that room and I talked to those people and it was just lifted. It just went away. Some people, they struggle with it. But as time goes on, as they stay in their recovery, I think they start to realize, like, even though I wanted to do it, I didn't do it, that was a power greater than myself stopping me from doing that. Um, and I think that's where people struggle with trying to name what that is, because people come in with their own baggage, and people may come in with their own religious baggage, biases, prejudices, and not want to name that. But as time goes on, when one can get past that and be open-minded to the idea of there's something other than myself, it can be a nice relief. But then not all the responsibility falls on me to handle everything.
So when you say that, I always think of the fourth step, the fearless moral inventory. That word fearless always strikes me as a step to spirituality. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, I always laugh at the idea in the fourth step of, made searching and then the word fearless, moral inventory. The idea that I'm not going to have any fear of looking at myself down to the studs, down to the the brick and mortar of who I am and what I'm about and the things I've done. Um, to not have any fear of that for me, that's a stretch. That's a big ask. And I look at these steps that I think they're put in an order for a reason. One is there for a reason. It starts with one, and it starts with the word we, acknowledging that we're not doing this alone, and acknowledging that, our behaviors, our addictions, whatever they were such a mess, and we were obviously completely, utterly out of control. And then having to go to two to say, there's something else out there other than me that I'm going to need to ask for help. That could be God, that could be the group, that could be a chair, that could be whatever. I just have to be open to that idea. And then when you get to the third step is saying, okay, I am going to turn my life over to that. I am going to have, again, starting to be fearless of saying, okay, here is who I am. And, I hope whatever this power is or whatever this being is loves me for my faults no matter what. And once getting that understanding that they do, that can help with being fearless. That no matter what I do, no matter what I did, no matter who I think I am, how bad I've been, that at the end of this, that power, that God, that universe, whatever I call it, is still going to be in my corner for me. And now I can take an honest look, as they say, a fearless look, and really look at who I am and what I'm about. And I find that in coming into recovery, there can be a tremendous amount of fear of that. It's in part a fear of the unknown. It's a fear of, am I going to go to jail? Is my spouse going to leave me? Am I ever going to get my kids back? Am I going to lose my job? And that fear can drive a lot of people to say, all right, I'll do whatever I got to do. Just make this pain stop. Okay, fine. And in the beginning, when it gets simplified to, well, just don't drink, just don't use, just don't gamble. Okay, yeah, the heat's on me. I can do that. It's taking it to the next level. And can someone replace that fear that drives someone into recovery and turn that into actual faith? That when you look at steps 2 and 3, believing that and turning it over, faith is, am I comfortable enough to hand over control to something else? Here's a template of 12 steps, traditions. There's a tremendous amount of support in support groups, and you can get plenty of ideas. You ask 4 people what you should do, you're going to get 4 different responses. But they're, heartfelt suggestions. They may be difficult, but can I follow through with that? Faith is, I don't know what's going to happen. I have to go through this thing. I have to make a difficult decision. It's going to be uncomfortable. But if I do it, up to this point, I've done everything they said, and I didn't relapse. I didn't use, and I got through it. I survived it. That's the faith, that if I do this thing and if I kind of step out on this ledge, I'm going to be okay. Having that understanding of no matter what happens, I'm going to be all right. I look at, things happen the way they're supposed to happen. They may not always happen in the time frame I want them to happen, but they're going to happen in the time frame that they're supposed to happen. To the time that I'm able to handle those things. There was a time when I had lost a job, and I joke, well, I didn't lose the job. It was still there. I was just told I couldn't do it anymore. And it was a very stressful time, and it was very concerning. And I realized if that event had happened earlier in my life, I wouldn't have been able to handle it. But because it happened later in life, I had the support system in place to then go through that and deal with it. And as a result of that, as traumatic and as difficult and as painful as that was in that moment, and honestly, for the next couple of years, I got through it. And it all led to where I was supposed to be today. And I can look back now, fortunately, and say, I am extremely happy doing the work that I'm doing today. And I can honestly and fearlessly look back and think, if I was still doing what I was back then, I full-heartedly do not believe I'd be as happy as I am today, at least in my work life. And that was having the faith to know that, I'm going to get through this. I don't like it, but I have the faith that it's going to work out the way it's supposed to work out. It didn't work out in the time frame that I wanted it to. I wanted things to move along a lot quicker, but it was a long, it felt like it was a long, slow process. But, here I am today, and I'm very happy with where I am today. So that's the faith, and that's, looking at the fourth step, having to make those difficult decisions. And I think in recovery, when you're looking at the fourth step, that's the first time you're literally putting pen to paper and having to do something difficult, something very tangible. I have to write down my issues and look at it. I got to think about it. I got to look at it, and I got to write it down. And I have to, it's scary to think that, people can work their way up the steps and they get to certain steps and say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And my experience has been, I've seen people stay sober for a period of time doing that, and they can stay sober for a long period of time. But I always look at it, how complete is their recovery? How happy are they in their recovery? Are they 80% happy, or are they 100% happy? And the people that I know that I've worked with that go through all 12 steps and do all the things that they do, they seem very content and peaceful with where they are in life.
So I think what I heard you say is faith is really letting go of control. Is that
Yes.
fair?
Yeah. And I understand that is such a scary thing, because people, before they get into recovery, it's trying to be in control of what's happening and thinking that they are in control of what's happening. And when they eventually get to that point of understanding that they've lost control, that's obviously very frustrating. And people fight that a lot. And some people never make it, and I get that. You come into recovery and you put down whatever it is, you can feel like, okay, I got control of this. I'm good. I got it. Things start coming back into your life. And that's all well and good. What can happen is people then start trying to take more control of their life. And as they say, as opposed to letting go. And I don't say that to say, let go. Don't worry about it. The bills are going to get paid. The kid, the gas will get in the car. No, you still have to work and do all the work. But again, it goes back to having that faith of knowing that if I do the work, it'll turn out the way it's supposed to turn out. I don't have to try to fit a square peg into a round hole. I try to let go of that control and let it be. And it's a fear that can stop a lot of that. Again, it goes back to that fear and that faith. People come in with a lot of fear. It drives people into recovery, and then it's trying to transition that to faith, that I don't have to be so scared of everything that happened in the past or my own behaviors. And if I'm doing the things that I'm supposed to do, if I'm following these steps, if I'm following this recovery program, then eventually this turns into a faith, because I start to see how it works. And I always keep it very simple. And when someone comes in, it's always, the success is you just didn't drink today. You didn't get high today. You didn't gamble today. You didn't overeat today. Those are that's um, that's what we're looking at. That's where we're starting at. And eventually you can what I would kind of look at as like a more well-rounded life. It's not about just putting it down, whatever it is, it's about putting it down and being happy. They realize step one is just about putting it down. I think it's the only one that mentions whatever the addiction is. And then everything else is built around, well, how do I keep it down and stay happy?
Kevin, I never realized, but when you talk about the steps, you use the term happy a lot. Can you just expound on that a little bit? Because I, you know, the steps are work and it is about recovery, but you just used happy a lot.
Well, I had a friend, a sponsor, a mentor had said to me, um, kind of angrily, he's like, why did you get sober? And I thought, oh no, I got to get this answer right. I got to get this answer right. And I said something, and he says, to be happy. You didn't, you don't put this down, you don't put whatever it is down to then be miserable and unhappy. I've seen it. Yeah. I mean, you see people that can just, I have a problem with drinking. Okay, just don't drink. If it was only that simple, again, it's those 12 steps about finding that peace within oneself. um, yeah, it's part of it's being patient. Most people in recovery are not patient people, stereotypically. And it's being okay with being not okay for a while. And then if you're eventually doing these things, you can have that opportunity to be happy. It's interesting, when you're in recovery, when you're in early recovery, you're trying to change, but sometimes your circumstances don't change. And you're still around the same people, you're still at the same job, you still have the same family, and they still behave and act and do the things they've always done. And it works for them. But the individual in recovery changes. And then what can happen is how that individual reacts or doesn't react to the situations around them. And that's part of the 12 steps, is learning how to do that. How do I not react to the way my mother talks to me, or the way my kids talk to me, or the way the boss talks to me, or the neighbor, or, I got into a car accident. How do I not fly off the handle? Those kind of things start to change. The individual themselves start to change. The situations around them don't change, but how they react to it starts to change. And when that can start to happen, there can be that peace within oneself. Sometimes when you talk about spirituality, it's those revelations where all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm different. They're still doing the same thing they've always done, but I'm different. I'm not triggered by that behavior. I'm not triggered by that comment, or whatever it may be. And I feel okay. And I think that's, at least for me, that's where the happiness comes in. Being able to be at peace with yourself. I think that, and I think that's a part of spirituality, is being at peace with yourself. I talked about this before, of when you talk about religion, there can be rules and regulations when you belong to a religion. And, when you walk into a place of worship, you have to behave a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to look a certain way. And for religion, organized religion, that's all well and good. But as someone who identifies as being spiritual, if I'm traveling and, I grew up Catholic, if I walk into a temple, and I've been to temples before for various services, I'm very at peace there. They could, I don't subscribe to the rituals that they have, but being at peace I have that sense of God being in that building with me. Could be in any building. If I'm out in the woods by myself, I can have that sense of I'm going to be okay. I'm at peace. I know wherever I am, God is with me. And that's a comment that my mother used to make to me as a child. Like, God's always with you. I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what she's talking about. Um, but in coming to AA, when they talk about God and they mention in the third step, it's God as I understand him or her. I have the ability to put my own spin on it. I don't have to take all of the religious doctrine that I grew up with, and I can come up with what I'm comfortable with, how that looks, and that in itself can be very comforting. And that when you talk about control, that gives me a little bit of control. It's not dictated to me that it has to look like this, and this. I know there's certainly influences I have from that upbringing, uh, but I also have my own spin on it, which is very nice. And when you talk about 12-step programs, if there's a million people in a recovery program, there's a million different types of, God as I understand him or her.
So is there the is the community of recovery itself spiritual?
Yes. Uh, And because the community is made up of individuals, there's different levels of spirituality with each individual. But as they come together as a whole, I always look at that as a kind of a spiritual entity. It's ironic that a lot of recovery is in a church basement. The doctrine's upstairs and the spirituality is downstairs. That's fine, but you can find spirituality in lots of different communities. I If people are in tune to their spirituality, I think they're bringing that with them wherever they go. It may not always be outspoken and talked about. It certainly is when someone walks into a house of worship. Like, that's part of what we're doing. We're trying to get that sense of spirituality and get that connection with God. I think when people go to meetings in recovery, it may not always be explicitly talked about, but I do think it's there. I get a sense that energy is there for that. Um, because there is a common purpose in that room. And from my experience, it's always been a common purpose of helping another human being. And for me personally, I don't care what the God, deity, whatever is. I would think they're pretty on board with that. That seems pretty on brand of what they're trying to accomplish. Helping your fellow human being.
So the whole idea in one of the steps about asking for help, is that prayer? Is that community? Is that, how would you define that?
I don't know if I would use the word prayer. It's definitely community. And again, I do think there is a sense of spirituality with that. There's certainly typically a large understanding that that's part of our primary purpose of why we're here. We're here to try to help ourselves, but in doing that, we have to help other people. Uh, and if someone's asking for that help, we got to give it. It was given to us freely. We need to give it freely. And when a new person walks into a room and they're able to raise their hand or acknowledge that, yes, excuse me, I'm new, I don't know what's going on. Typically, you'll see a couple of people surround them after the meeting. Sometimes you'll see a phone list will go by and everybody will write their phone numbers down and give to the person and say, hey, here's a list of phone numbers. If you need anything, give us a call. Every person that puts their phone number down, that's a connection with spirituality. They're thinking outside of themselves, and they're thinking, the group as a whole trying to help another person, because they've all been there. And that's something I always tell people in early recovery is I can empathize with how scary that is walking into a room of a bunch of strangers and acknowledging the powerlessness and you no longer have control over this. But every single person in that room has been in that seat. They all know what that's like. Some it's newer than others, but everybody can remember what it was like to walk into that room for the first time and how scary that is. And as a community, I think that again, that power, that energy comes together and says it's interesting to watch because it can, someone raises their hand and says it's their first meeting, the energy just shifts to that person. Like all eyes are on that person, like, oh, there's somebody new, we can go help them. And sometimes in a meeting, that's what the topic will become. It could be they could have said, well, we're going to talk about this. And then all of a sudden someone says, well, I've never, this is the first time I've been at a meeting. And then it just shifts to that person.
And that sense of safety in that group is, I guess, when I look at the steps, I look at the service and that individual that walks into the room for the first time, but there's that service call is so strong, is it not, throughout the steps?
It is. I mean, it's explicit in the 12th step. It's, when you go through all these steps, when you get to 12, it's like, okay, you're ready to go out and help other people. And when someone comes in for the first time, I think everybody has that acknowledgement of there's somebody new here. We're here now to help that person. I've been, sober 2 days. This person's sober been a day. I have an extra day that I can help them with, that I have an extra day of experience of what that's like. It's I had a thought, it just flew out of my head.
That happens.
It does. But it is nice to see. Oh, the thought was when someone new comes in and that energy shifts to them, that could be scary for a person if they haven't had that. I mean, if you have someone coming in that hasn't had a lot of love and concern and compassion and understanding, and then maybe there's 30, 20, 30, 40 people that all of a sudden are sending all their love and positive energy towards you, that can be overwhelming. If someone doesn't have that kind of supports in their life, then all of a sudden 10 people after a meeting come up to them and surround them and give them a cup of coffee and a donut and say, hey, here's a list of phone numbers. Give us a call. How are you? What's your name? Where are you from? And it's like, oh, hey, dial it back. Don't come on so strong. But it's, that sense of energy that people have of wanting to give back, of again, what was so freely given to them. And some people, some people are scared by that, and some people are overwhelmed with that and be like, oh my God, this is great. Like this is the thing I've always been looking for. And like I didn't know that this was available. Which is also a positive thing, but the scary thing for me is like in the room, in the moment, you can feel it. But then what happens when you walk out the door? Everybody scatters, people go home, and that new person is still there. And sometimes there's somebody in a parking lot still talking to them, 45 minutes later, but eventually they're going to have to leave and go somewhere. And I think, part of it's God's grace of that individual left alone in the parking lot who it was their first meeting and they have a list of phone numbers and they had all this good and positive energy and all these people reached out to them. God's grace is, can they get to the next meeting? Can they make that phone call to say, hey, I was thinking of a drink, or hey, I'm just feeling lonely, or hey, I was having a bad day. I met you at the meeting, the other day. to not pick up not to pick up that substance between that moment and the next one. I looked back and said, well, that was obviously God's grace. I didn't understand, you don't quite understand it in the moment when you're going through it, but as time goes on, you could say, oh yeah, that was obviously God was carrying me.
I hear when you talk about this, it sounds like there's a lot of gratitude for those individuals that do reach out. When you get past the point, the people that help you through the steps, that must make a tremendous, well, beyond community, there's just such a sense of gratitude.
It is, and it is very unique. There's two things. One, I remember 1999, we were going to 2000, and it was ABC News, the nightly news. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was doing like at the end of the week, he was doing a person of the century, like someone that made a significant impact on the century. And they talked about Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, and how those two people getting together like that changed the trajectory of recovery in a major, major way. And it's helped millions upon millions of people. And it was like hard for the layperson to understand that. The layperson I use in this example is my stepfather, very learned man, went up the corporate ladder, did lots of stuff, very accomplished, all this kind of stuff. And one day he asked me about 12-step programs, and he says, how does that all work? Like, this seems to be a big organization. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, how does it function? Like, I don't understand why it functions the way it functions. I simply said to him, I said, because it's not about money. It's about helping somebody else. It's about helping someone with, their alcohol problem, their drug problem, their gambling problem, whatever it is. The primary purpose isn't to make an extra dollar or make the stockholders happy. It's about that individual just staying sober that day. That's it. That's the goal. It's kind of like, if you keep your expectations low, you got a pretty good shot at making it. And 70 plus years later, it's still going strong. It's the simplicity of it is still working. And believe me, they've had their bumps and bruises along the way, but the core values, the core principles are still the same. That hasn't changed. The same 12 steps that they had 1935, they're still using today. And they've been translated into numerous languages. They've been translated into numerous different types of recovery groups. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It is amazing that they have lasted that long. I mean, when I look at what we do here at Starting Point, we do have, of the 23 groups who meet, probably 20 of them are all 12-step programs of all kinds of types of addictions. It just is a really amazing process. The only thing we didn't talk about, Kevin, that I do want to talk about just rather quickly, and then I'm going to ask anybody if they have a question, they can unmute themselves as long as you keep it short. Kevin would be happy to answer it. But we do have to touch on meditation because some of us struggle with it.
The one thing I had mentioned this before about, is there a difference between prayer and meditation? And with prayer, I looked at it as, asking for something, asking for support, asking for guidance from whatever it is that you believe in. And with meditation, I looked at it as just listening. It's learning to be quiet and to be in the moment. Again, there's a reason the steps are in the order that they're in. It's, when you look at 2 and 3, it's beginning to get an understanding that there's some power greater than myself. And then you do these other steps. And then when you get towards the end, when you get to 11, it's talking about prayer and meditation. And prayer can be, asking for guidance, and meditation is listening for the answer. And it's, the meditation is learning how to just sit and be quiet. It's trying to get to that peaceful moment within yourself, turning the noise off. And when I work with people about meditation, they can be concerned with, when I sit in the quiet, my head just, I can't turn it off. And it's understanding it's not about sitting down and all of a sudden you're a guru. It takes time, and it's trying to do 30 seconds of just trying to be peaceful and be quiet and slow your mind down. And, sometimes, there's different techniques you can use. I kind of use a breathing one where I'll breathe in for 5 seconds, I'll hold it for 5 seconds, and then I'll breathe out for 5 seconds. And even during that process, my mind can wander, and that's okay. I just restart, and it's just practicing that over and over and over again. So to be able to get to the point where someone feels like they can sit and meditate for 10 minutes, I've never met anybody that can just start at 10 minutes. You start at 10 seconds. And that's where you go, and you try to get to a place where you can be at peace with yourself, you can sit in the quiet, and you can listen to hear what the answers are going to be. I'm not asking any questions, I'm just listening for any answers that come by.
Kevin, this was really helpful. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. Does anyone have a quick question? You feel free to unmute yourselves. I think with that, Kevin, if you'd like to lead us in the Serenity Prayer, I think that would be great. First paragraph of it.
Sure. We had done the we version earlier. Sure we can go with that. Moment of silence for those still suffering in and out of the rooms, or for any intentions you may have. God, ask the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change
the things we can,
and the wisdom to know the
know the difference.
We are somebody special.
Don't make no jump.
He may not be here, but his spirit's with us, right?
Right, absolutely. Very good.
Thank you.
I did. I enjoyed it.